Now to other stories. The African Union's Agenda 2063 is a visionary framework for the socio-economic transformation of Africa over the next 5 decades. At the heart of this agenda is the recognition of the critical role that e-governance can play in driving Africa's development and integration. E-governance refers to the use of information and communication technologies to improve governance, increase transparency and accountability, and enhance citizen engagement. The integration of e-governance into Agenda 2063 is crucial for several reasons, one of which is the potential to increase efficiency and effectiveness in government service delivery, reducing bureaucracy and corruption, as well as enhancing transparency and accountability, enabling citizens to access information and track government performance. To achieve these goals, the African Union has identified several key e-governance initiatives, among which are the establishment of a unique digital identity for all Africans, the provision of online services for citizens, and the use of data analytics to inform policy decisions. Adeyinka Adeyemi is the Managing Director at Intermark Consulting. He joins us now to discuss e-governance and the African Union Agenda 2063. Good to have you on Arise News.
Thank you for having me.
That's a lot, I must say. But maybe you should tell us about this Africa Agenda 2063. I know it's a 50-year plan, but it started in 2013, and the first 10 years was supposed to be assessed. Tell us about that and where we are now.
Thank you very much. Again, thanks for having me on the show. So Agenda 2063, the Africa Union Agenda 2063, speaks to the concept of the Africa we want by 2063. And the great leaders of Africa came together 2013 to develop that agenda with the intention to say that we have a certain vision of where we believe Africa should be by 2063. However, let's take it in tranches, milestones, 10-year milestones per time. And we've been in discussions with the African Union, NEPAD, as well as the SDG Center for Africa. And we realized that the only way that Africa can come to terms with that agenda, the Agenda 2063, again, I repeat, the Africa we want by 2063, is to begin to look at Africa from the lens of digital transformation. So you cannot get any reasonable or meaningful impact in the continent of Africa without ensuring that the government, especially, also the private sector, come up with an agenda that has digital transformation within its core. And really, that is what that agenda, speaks to. How do we get governments across Africa to begin to use technology to drive, things like social inclusion, to drive citizen participation, for instance. And then we look at the different elements of the SDG goals, the 17 SDG goals, and then say that what is the role of technology, even with respect to those goals? So if you take education, for instance, how do we use technology to drive education? How do we use technology to drive healthcare delivery, to drive citizen engagement, to drive, transportation, to drive agriculture even? With the introduction of drone technologies and so on, we can see the impact, across the globe in other climes where technology is taking the center stage with respect to development. So in Africa, we talk about growth, we talk about development, we talk about trade and commerce. 2063 is a long way ahead. And again, if you look at the market in terms of the demography, you have millennials, you have Gen Zs, you have Generation X. Everybody is living on the net. These are digital natives. So you really cannot project 50 years down the line without considering the population and the demography of that population at the time. So we like I said earlier, we're in engagement with the SDG Center for Africa, with AU NEPAD, to say that, hey, this is our take We represent the Africa e-governance, conference initiative. We are based in Kigali, in Rwanda, and that's where the secretariat is. Intermark Consulting is obviously in Lagos, Nigeria, but work very closely with those agencies. And the objective is really to drive e-governance in Africa.
All right, if I may come in here, Mr. Adeyemi.
Yes.
I can't help but think that towards the tail end of your discussion, there is a caveat here. There has to be that willingness to engage, to be able to say, yes, I'm going to embrace this. So how receptive is Africa to the concept of e-governance realistically, based on current observations, current socioeconomic narratives?
Right. I think the narrative is changing in favor of e-governance, and I'll tell you why. We have done several case studies across Africa, and I'll tell you about Rwanda, I'll tell you about Zambia, and I'll tell you about Nigeria. So Rwanda has a government entity called Irembo, and what Irembo does is to transform governance digitally. So every aspect of life in Rwanda is touched by technology because Irembo, a creation of government, has taken it upon itself to digitally transform social life in Irembo, and it's working, right? Same for Zambia. The government of Zambia set up an institution called the Smart Zambia Institute. Responsibility is to introduce technology into the public life, public sector, even private sector, and they have fantastic initiatives that cut across every aspect of life in Zambia. Now, we have similar experiences in Nigeria with respect to the different areas, but I must say that I'm very impressed by the current Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy with the introduction of the Digital Economy and E-Governance Act 2024, which is the blueprint, if you like, that will bring about that transformation in Nigeria in a cohesive manner. We're seeing pockets here and there with respect to, for instance, digital financial services, with respect to digital health, right? And we're seeing the incursion of technology in agriculture, in education as well, right? But all of this needs to come together the way the Rwandans have done it, the way the Zambians have done it, to say there need to be a driver, if you like, for that initiative to, to impact lives of the ordinary Nigerians. And that really is what that document is saying. It's a legal framework that defines what government intends to do with the digital transformation agenda in Nigeria.
Well, I know that there's a lot to unpack when it comes to this Africa Union Agenda 2063, and which is why you have broken it down to 10-year, in 5 places.
Yes.
But looking at the SDG, you talked about the fact that this is also in alignment with the SDGs. Now, one of the goals is to end hunger, end poverty.
Correct.
And I know that at the Malabo Convention in 2014, one of the goals was to end hunger by 2025. This is 2024. How close are we? Are we even in that trajectory, in that path at all?
We are, I must say, but still a light years away. So next week, we have the United Nations General Assembly taking place in New York. That assembly is where a lot of government and private sector officials gather to define those kind of agenda to say, how do we end hunger by 2025, for instance? The theme for the United Nations Agenda 2030 is leave no one behind. That also is the theme for this year's, the 79th edition of the United Nations General Assembly taking place next week. Leave no one behind. And I'm coming to the issue of hunger. The only way to end hunger, right, in Africa, again, I repeat, is to begin to look at the role of technology, right? There's so much that is being done right now to introduce technology into the agricultural space, right? So that it's not manually, implemented anymore. You can have, a even climate change controlled by technology that will be of benefit to agriculture. You can have things like, seed production and enhancement done with the aid of technology. And so those are the ways that technology can improve, agriculture to the extent that you can begin to even visualize an end to hunger. Now, to do that, government need to be deliberate in its strategy and implementation of some of those agendas that we like to come up with. Nothing wrong with saying our agenda is leave no one behind. Okay. But are we driving it in Africa? Don't forget that this is a global agenda. It's not just Africa. That's the United Nations Agenda 2030 that we're talking about now. How does that fit into the African Union Agenda 2063? What is the budget, right, that government typically will put in place in Africa now, African government? Because that shows demonstrates your interest and your commitment to having hunger end by 2025.
You said 2025 like it's 10 years away.
Next year.
It's just a few months away.
If you now go back to 2014 to now and look at the commitment in terms of financial commitment to ending hunger by 2025, then you begin to say, hey, are we really serious about this? And it is not just, an issue in Africa. We're talking a global agenda. So what is the position of Africa? What is the position of Nigeria with respect to that mandate, right? And the only way to measure it is to say, how much of technology have we deployed in agriculture? I think we should be talking to the Minister of Agriculture to tell us, what, and of course the agencies under it, to tell us really whether they are committed or not, and how much are they putting into that commitment. I think we should have that conversation.
All right, and on a final note, so transparency, accountability, security are the three pillars of corporate governance. So
yes.
How can we align this with e-governance prospects in Nigeria or Africa in general? I know you already said something about the framework and the willingness to do this, but when it comes to actual implementation, that's where we seem to have issues, regarding policy implementation here in Africa or in Nigeria as well. So briefly, please, I'd just like your thoughts on that.
So I agree with you. There's what you call the corporate governance framework. Those three elements, especially transparency and accountability, are some of the key framework elements for corporate governance. Without them, you don't have corporate governance. So what technology introduces to governance is those elements of transparency, of accountability, because you can also then begin to have audit trail. It will be obvious to the people that government is either doing what they're supposed to do or not doing what they're supposed to do, because there's audit trail, because there's technology to show, right, that we're on track or we're not on track. I think the challenge that we have in Africa is that we have massive population, which is a fact, and in countries like Nigeria as well, and sometimes may feel overwhelmed by how to bring these guys really into the equation. But you already know that before you go into power, right? To say, look, I have over 1 billion people to look after on the continent. How do I leverage on technology? And that conversation is going to be had next week in New York. So how do we do this thing and leave no one behind? Right? And I think that's where we are.
Hopefully, maybe at the end of the
convention
we'll have more answers as it were.
I think so.
All right, Mr. Adeyinka Adeyemi, MD, Intermac Consulting. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.